Are you wondering what's next for electric vehicles in the Treasure Valley? Tonight's speakers will share the basics of EVs and the EV charging, and their insights on what you, as a potential EV driver, can expect from charging infrastructure in the coming years. They'll delve into charging barriers, innovations, and general technology limitations, and we'll also have plenty of time for questions and answers and a lively discussion. Whit Jamieson is a program manager for Forth, where he specializes in EV and EV charging trends. He joined the team in 2019 and has worked on a variety of programs, including workplace, curbside, and multifamily home charging, agricultural electrification, utility partnerships, ride and drives, and more. Before working at Forth, Whit studied energy science at the Institute for Energy Studies at Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington. Varun supports Forth's Access to Charging team as a program associate. His work centers around creating more inclusive, accessible, and equitable pathways to deploying charging infrastructure. Varun holds a Master's of Science degree from Art Center College of Design's Graduate Transportation System and Design Department, and a Bachelor of Engineering in Mechanical Engineering. Now, some housekeeping items. We have soft drinks and refreshments in the back by the door, but over to the right here, my right. Restrooms are out the back, to the right, and on your right. If you did not sign in, please do so before you leave. Sign-in forms are on the table by the door to the left where Amy's sitting. Evaluation forms are on your tables. Please fill one out before you leave and leave it in the basket on the table by the door. Watch for emails and the Compass website for information on future presentations. And then last but not least, let's avoid the awkward situation, and please silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Whit and Varun for their presentation.
Thank you all for coming out, and thank you, Compass Idaho, for having us here. All right, I feel like this is not my era of background, but I feel like we were promised flying cars a long time ago. Does anybody remember that? And we got electric cars, so yay. So what is Forth? What is the organization I work for? We are a nonprofit, a national nonprofit based out of Portland. We do a lot of work in transportation electrification, but that is our mission. A lot of big words in there, and I think it really does a good job of showing what we aim to do. So if you do have questions about Forth, there's plentiful time for us to talk about that later. This tells a little bit more about the specific aspects of what Forth is and what Forth does. We've got our programs team, our policy team, our industry development team, and our marketing and communications teams. And part of that programs team, we break down our programs by access to cars, access to charging, and access to emerging modes. Access to emerging modes is sort of a catch-all for new projects and exciting new adventures. Complex. Sorry, important caveat. I'm part of the access to charging team. Kind of makes sense. I'm here to talk about charging and EVs, but I've also done a lot of different roles. I've been part of a lot of different projects at Forth in my time, including EV 101s and talking with utilities. Much more. All right. So the agenda. And I want to mention we've thrown some puppies in the slides to keep you engaged. I made the images real small, so hopefully it's a fun little game of finding those puppies. There's going to be quite a lot of time for Q&A, but so let's just start with the basics, and we'll have some questions in just a a second, but just talking about what EVs are. Generally, they're broken down by battery electric vehicles, BEVs, and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which describe themselves. Here's some examples. Some interesting aspects about the plug-in hybrids is that they often have an EV mode, that if they have enough battery, you can just push a button, and they'll just be, you can just drive them in EV mode. It's pretty fun. Obviously, the battery electric vehicles are only getting their energy from the big battery, which means all of your heating, all of your accessory uses have to come from that energy too. So sort of some cool questions, just want to gauge the audience. How many of you have ridden in an electric vehicle as defined by both BEVs and plug-in electric plug-in? Cool, wow, okay. So almost all of you. All right, please raise your hand if you have if you drive a battery electric vehicle regularly. All right. And then finally, raise your hand if you have driven a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. Sorry. All right. So here are some models that are coming up. I like to include this just because most people that aren't in this industry are not like checking out vehicles every day, like me. It's kind of an obsession. It's great. And some of these vehicles are already out. Some of these vehicles are coming soon. All these are crossover SUVs. But the point of this slide is to emphasize there are many more models coming your way very soon. I understand Idaho doesn't have a lot of EVs right now, but that is not going to be the case in 5 to 10 years. As I put at the bottom, they're not here right now, and they are here right now, but they're not here in large quantities. That is going to change, and it's going to happen faster than you expect. Here's some more vehicles. Honestly, I just like looking at them, but also most people don't track this, so it's important to know that you've got a lot of more models coming your way, and that's really important for people that want variety. They want diversity in their vehicle choice, and hopefully with more models coming out, it'll drive down prices, make it more affordable, make it more accessible. So it's a little bit wordy, apologize for that, but there's some important stuff here. Usually when a model comes out, you've got a smaller battery-sized entry model that's going to have a lower range, usually around 200-ish miles, 250, and then a longer range battery model, higher trim usually, and that's going to be more around 300 miles or more potentially. Often, all-wheel drive options add somewhere between 2,500 to 5,000. I've seen higher than that. I've also seen lower than that in a couple cases. Additionally, that all-wheel drive is going to reduce the range by a little bit. It's going to depend on the vehicle by how much, but that's an important thing to note. If something feels off, like if you're looking at models and that's not matching up, just do some double checking. Right now, the all-wheel drive size and range is really the key items you want to look at for price, with the exception of perhaps the luxury market, which is just higher anyway. And right now, because demand is higher than supply, you're getting prices that are higher than what people really want to pay. It's really, what's the word? It's really affected by the markets that have the wealthiest folks. And that's primarily California, and also they've got a lot of incentives. And they have a lot more infrastructure, so it makes it easier for people to just see the cars, see the chargers, and say, this is doable for me too. And so, yeah, anyway, I put that line down at the bottom where we're going to have a lot of time to talk about some of the cost trends. So if you have questions, write them down. I feel like that's one area that I do get a lot of questions. Whenever I talk to a dealership in the Portland area, I'm always asking, hey, what are you seeing next 6 months? Are you seeing prices stabilizing? Are you seeing prices going up, go down? More supply of certain vehicles? And I'm excited to see more supply as well. I do think it's coming, but it's happening slower than expected, of unfortunately. So people are liking their EVs. They're not selling them. They're not trading them in. Yeah, maybe that's a good thing. Okay, so I'm gonna gloss over these because we can come back to them later on. This is tax credit information. Nobody really wants to be thinking about that, at least when I really know. But it's important. These are incentives that are good through 2032. These are significant incentives. It's a tax credit. It's a non-refundable tax credit. And this specific section is on the new vehicles. There are quite a few sort of details here, and it's dependent on the batteries, where it's assembled, where the vehicle is assembled. Has to be in North America. Asterisks, again, there's a lot of nuances here. And there's income restrictions as well as MSRP caps. So that's pretty important when you're going out to look at vehicles, because different vehicles may or may not qualify. There's some good websites that detail what vehicles what vehicles qualify and what vehicles don't. Would recommend just doing a little Google search to find that out as well. I believe the website is fueleconomy.gov. You'll find that. And then I threw up the IRS tax form because if you do want to know more, or if you do have somebody that knows taxes that you can consult with, you can talk to them and say, hey, is this form? Can you tell me more about it? Can you find out more for me? That's 8936. There's a lot of information online as well, of course, kind of how the internet works. And then there's also this awesome thing on used vehicle EV tax credits too. Again, this is a federal tax credit. It's a non-refundable tax credit. And there are, again, income restrictions, but there's also vehicle restrictions based on age of the vehicle, its class, so it's a class 1 through 3, up to 14,000 pounds. So even some of the heavier trucks are obviously going to qualify as well. And then, obviously, not previously used the credit and sold by a dealership. And what I didn't know was that the credit can actually be claimed every 3 years, which is if you're trying to game the system, I guess. That top point, $4,000 or 30% of the vehicle sale price. These vehicles have to cost less than $25,000, so there's not a large market for them right now. There's just not that many vehicles that fall into that category. We'll talk about those in just a minute. But once you're down to that point, that 25,000 mark, 30% of that, I think it was about $8,000 or $8,500. So you're talking that $4,000 being reached even by a lower cost vehicle as well. So some vehicles that I've been keeping my eye on for a while, under 30K is what I put, because I expect them to be under 25K in the next 2 years. Or they're already there. The Chevy Bolt and the Nissan Leaf, and even some Ioniq EVs are all regularly found for less than $25,000. That said, they're not often found nearby. And I think that's a big caveat, especially for Idaho, because there's not as many EVs here. The dealerships aren't selling as many EVs, and the network of knowledge is just not as great. So it's important to think outside the state sometimes. I'm sorry, really am. They will come here. They will get here. The dealerships will also evolve, and the OEMs, the auto manufacturers, will also be producing more EVs in the coming years as well. And yes, even the Tesla Model 3s are going to get down to less than $25,000. I have seen a few. They have a lot of miles on them, though, like 120. And in that situation, you really want to watch and look for the battery health. There's a couple companies, I want to say Recurrent is the one that I'm most familiar with, that will work with dealerships to provide sort of a battery health status to potential buyers. So that is a fantastic tool. If you're looking for an EV that you want to know that the battery is working, has really good health. That's sort of a place to go. And actually, going back, some vehicles even have like an internal health monitor. The Leaf specifically has a little bar gauge. It's either 10 or 12 little bars, and that'll tell you it's like long-term health. So that's kind of cool. So the Argonne National Lab has been tracking EVs sold. I'm not sure how many of these EVs have gone out of service. So I think the actual number of on-road EVs right now is around 3 million. But 3.5 million sold since 2010. So, you know, the hockey stick, we're approaching the vertical point. And also that EREV is an extended range electric vehicle. That's generally stated as a term for vehicles that have a large electric battery, generally large enough for at least 100 miles or more, and then it also has some sort of generator that puts energy back into the battery. A good example of that is the BMW i3 with the range extender. There's a couple of ones as well. So getting into some benefits, just by the vote of hands, it looked like most people are pretty familiar with EVs or somewhat familiar, so I'm going to go through a lot of these slides pretty quickly. If we want to come back to them, we always can. The one area that I think is really important is the energy dollars staying local. It's something a lot of people don't think about. When you buy gas, that's not always staying local. And especially considering a lot of that money is going for refining and for the crude as well. When you compare it to how much of that money is staying either regionally or locally, it's a big difference. So this is comparing CO2 emissions over the lifespan of an EV. And it's pretty dramatic. They are making some assumptions here, obviously here and here. And they're probably making a few other assumptions. But it's important to recognize that the more you drive an electric vehicle, the faster you reach that parity point, because it does take more to manufacture an electric vehicle, primarily because of the batteries. It costs more carbon, more pollution to actually make an electric vehicle. However, the important part here is that it takes usually 1 to 2, maybe 3 years to get that back because of how much more efficient and less polluting they are, even when you factor in the electric grids that they're working on. So this is a good slide from Union of Concerned Scientists. They've been doing this math for quite some time, I think somewhere in the range of 5 or 6 years. And basically it's comparing electric vehicles if their emissions were then translated to miles per gallon. And there's a lot of assumptions that go on behind this chart, but it's a pretty useful thing to understand the difference between electric vehicles and internal combustion engine vehicles. And there's a great slide that they usually pair with this, which is the most efficient electric vehicle in this map, and it's about 30 to 40% better. So each one of these numbers is 40% higher, 30 to 40% higher. So really important to recognize that here in the Pacific Northwest, our electric grids are pretty darn not carbon intensive. There's a better way of saying that, but it's really great.
Can you say what, if you take the Pacific Northwest 107, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm. It's like you're driving a gasoline vehicle that's getting 107 miles per gallon.
Oh,
Except-
that's the equivalent.
Except none of those emissions are being emitted at the local level. They're being emitted more at the global level. And the difference in those emissions is actually pretty important when it comes to asthma rates, as well as pollution that says, I'm not sure if the Treasure Valley gets inversions in the winter, I'm seeing some head nods, yeah. I was in Salt Lake City and they're known for that, but I guess Treasure Valley is also maybe. Those local emissions are really important when you factor in those inversions and when that smog just kind of just hangs over you for a long time. That's a really important thing that is also important when you take it out of just the light duty. The heavy duty stuff is actually generally more impactful. And this presentation is not focused on that, but I think it's really important with the buses, electric school buses. Kind of emit a lot of diesel particulate matter. That's been cleaned up a lot over the last 2 decades. But you know, the rates of asthma were really high for kids in areas that they're breathing in a lot of particulate matter specifically. Again, we can go back to all of these slides. One thing to note, electric vehicles aren't just 4-wheeled cars. They can also come in all shapes and sizes, and their uses are near infinite. I think this is a fun slide, kind of showcases a lot of the different technology that's coming out. Additionally, it's more than 4 wheels sometimes. And these vehicles can be really critical to electrify. Their impact can be far more impactful than just you know, a vehicle that's primarily driven by a single person. So,
I just want to point out that we just got an electric Zamboni at Idaho Ice World. So
that's
all
awesome.
kinds of vehicles.
That's awesome. What's the next thing? I thought you were going to move to right here, but okay. And EVs are everywhere, so it's also, you know, you already have EVs out and about in your neighborhood. I'm specifically Boise right now, but you know, once they have one EV, they're going to add more. They're going to figure out the issues and move forward. All right, so I feel like this was mentioned somewhere else, but battery electric vehicles specifically are cheaper to maintain. This was a recent study by, I want to say, Consumer Reports back in 2022. They did a pretty thorough study, and they're going to follow it up with many more studies. I think those are going to get better and better. But they found some interesting trends that, you know, there is a point at which a lot of the battery electric vehicles right now, you are potentially going to need to replace the batteries when you get up to the high enough miles. And so that's sort of a big caveat, you know. However, I think what we're seeing from the industry is as the battery technology gets better, that timeline for having to get a new battery really moves further out, especially if you're not putting 20 or 15 plus thousand miles on it per year. And another thing to factor in there is the more you drive an electric vehicle, potentially the cheaper it is to own as well, because electricity is both generally more stable in terms of price for residential customers, but also that fuel savings. It's huge. So the more you drive, the faster you get that return. Solid warranties. It's important. A lot of people buy their vehicles and want to make sure they have a good warranty. Actually, that was a key feature when my parents bought a plug-in hybrid. And yes, this was absolutely beautiful to drive at. It was gorgeous Smith Rock near Bend, Oregon. Incredible. 5 a.m. Beautiful. Yeah. I should have put this slide earlier on in the slideshow, but EVs are really fun to drive. I've driven quite a few different EVs. It's probably the biggest benefit of this job. Driving a lot of different fun electric vehicles, testing them out, driving them long distances. This trip was, again, incredible. There's more photos. We'll talk about them. But I also love I'm really lazy. I don't like taking my foot off the accelerator or moving my feet. And one of the best things for me about electric vehicles is the regenerative braking. And that means when I take my foot, okay, not everybody's gonna be able to see this, but when I take my foot like partially off the pedal, it basically coasts. There's a threshold point where it coasts. And then when I go back off of that, it's gonna start regenerating electricity to the battery and slowing me down. And you can usually just push a button and that turns off. You'll just continue coasting as you would, like in any vehicle. But that's really fun for me because lazy. I don't want to take my foot off the brake or the accelerator. So I just have to change the level of where my foot's at. They're also really fast. They're really torquey, which in this case just means really fast acceleration to usually about, say, 30 to 50 miles per hour. Some of them even more torquey. You'll just keep going. It's just super fast and they're really fun to drive. As well, because the batteries are in the bottom of the vehicles for almost every vehicle out there right now, you're gonna have really good handling generally. And additionally, you're not gonna have as much spinning tires, especially if it's an all-wheel drive vehicle. The front wheel drives are a little bit notorious for some spinning, but yeah. And of course they're quiet, but I feel like everybody kind of knows that one. Wanted to include this slide because I'm a realist and I've been in this industry for a while. I generally see more of the flaws than I see the benefits. So I like to have, the ratio of talking about the not so perfect stuff to the wonderful, awesome societal benefits. As societal benefits, lots, and then a couple of the issues. This is one of the issues ones. The biggest ones for me is the affordability. It's taking a while. Some would say that is a policy situation. We could have had some of those incentives sooner. That would have encouraged the market to produce more vehicles faster, and we'd have a more robust used market. This one, especially in Idaho, is very critical. And it's important to recognize that there's a lot of money coming down from the federal government right now to install DC fast charging along major corridors. We'll get to all those nasty words right there. But this is really critical for making people feel like they can actually go places. I would love to be able to take an electric vehicle to visit my aunt and uncle in Billings, Montana. I cannot do that, not realistically. There are very few vehicles where I would feel comfortable doing that right now. Tesla. And that's unfortunate because it shouldn't just be one brand that you can get everywhere. So I'm really excited to see all of these things change and see how people are hesitant to adopt an electric or buy an electric vehicle, lease, buy a used vehicle, and see how it can, be a fuel savings, money saver for them long term, and also really fun to drive. Going back to that, it's pretty big. So, yeah, okay, we gotta address this bottom one because we're in Idaho and it gets cold here. You have long distances and freeway speeds, which combine for pretty significant range decrease in the winter, sometimes not even in the winter. I think that's probably where that long range all-wheel drive vehicles really come in, and the production of vehicles needs to increase before we're going to have a used market that allow for affordable long range all-wheel drive vehicles, which is what you need when the weather can dramatically impact your range, when it's very cold, and when you need to drive fast to get somewhere. Additionally, those DC fast chargers along major highways, generally most people, when they're driving super fast, they are on a major highway. Sometimes they're on a state route. So electrifying those routes as well can be critical. The more charging infrastructure there is, the more comfortable people are going to be driving even when it is very cold. Here's some more trends. I want to apologize for all the words. It happens. Those top areas I've already covered. So the standards for minimum threshold vehicles from auto manufacturers is, but then again, if you want to tow, you've got a problem. Because right now, towing will have your range. And that's pretty bad. Which means you need larger batteries, vehicles that have more range. That directly impacts the price, which means we're even farther away from having affordable vehicles that can tow. That said, the key there is recognizing that this also impacts gasoline vehicles. It's just that gasoline vehicles can carry a lot more energy, like a lot, like 6 times in some cases. So I do think we're going to see advancements here, specifically in trailers that actually can charge the vehicles. There's going to be a lot of work to make something happen so you can charge your vehicle at the same time as running it. But I think we'll get there eventually, as well as having parking spots and charging spots that allow you to recharge very quickly while not having to disconnect your trailer, just drive-throughs. And I think we'll get there. I do think we will. I do think it's going to take a little while. I don't know. Can we just do a little hand raise on how many people tow regularly? Just a few? Okay. Can I ask sort of what weight you're towing?
8,000.
8,000? Okay.
3,500 and 14,000.
Okay. So medium duty trucks primarily? Okay.
150 and 350.
Makes sense. Patty, I don't know if you also.
We tow a raft. I don't know what the weight would be. 18-foot cataract.
I've got a colleague that has a pretty aerodynamic trailer, and he says it halves their range. He's got a Model Y, so he brings the 320 miles down to about 160, 170, and he's towed around a lot. He lives in Southern Oregon, so he really does to go out a lot. And then he has a little tiny raft that he carries around. He says that makes a negligible impact. So it really does matter about how much weight. And one of our projects at Fourth, we tow around an electric tractor. It's about 4,500 pounds. Sometimes at some point we're going to even haul around multiple electric tractors at the same time. But that weight is pretty significant. And we're gonna have some lessons learned in the coming years, which I'm really excited to see. We're also getting so currently right now we've got a Rivian. We've done a little bit of towing with that, but we're gonna get an F-150 Lightning in the next year or so and see how that works as well. Very excited to see how that changes. I'm gonna skip over some of these other ones, but it's important to recognize that generally when you have a new model in production, it's going to take a little while for that to hit the used market. It's just the nature of new vehicles, but that is sort of what I've always been looking for and seeing how that changes, how that adjusts. All right, we'll talk a little bit more about vehicle efficiency in a bit. So this is sort of a mini break and first Q&A session, Q&A kind of opportunity. That said, we're going to hop into charging in just a minute. So if you got charging questions, let's hold off on those. Any questions? No.
So when you talk about towing being difficult, at first I thought you meant it's hard to tow electric cars, but what you ended up saying was it's hard for them to do towing, or it reduces the range. Are there any concerns about towing electric cars?
Not particularly.
Okay.
I mean,
Thank you.
not particularly. I guess I should also say, electric vehicles actually are great to tow with, and in all of my friends' experience towing with an electric vehicle, they're like, I didn't even feel the trailer. Like, that's like 5,000 pounds and like nothing, like easy. Some people do say they want to change, they have to make some modifications so that, or not serious modifications, but they turn off the brakes for the trailer so that they can regenerate all of that electricity, all of that mass moving downhill to the battery. So you can end up getting a lot of that power back. But remember, you gotta get up the hill first. So you never get it all back. Question?
So at some point, will you be talking about, for instance, state policy and impacts on adapting for EVs?
I can touch on that a little bit at the end. Policy is not my major area of expertise, so I might have to refer you to either colleagues of mine or people here in the audience. Or do some research. Actually, gentleman behind it, sorry.
Can you elaborate on weather conditions and how they impact EVs?
Is there a way for me to turn off the slides as I change?
Turn them off by you, and you see them?
Oh, yeah, it's not possible. We have a slide at the way end of it in the extra slides that shows, right now there's a group called Geotab that has done a lot of vehicle monitoring of different models, and generally when you get to about -20, I want to say you're down to about 40% range. When you're at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you're at about 115% of what the EPA estimated range is going to be. When you get up to 120 degrees, you get about 60-65%. So you can kind of see a curve being made. That's what they're trying to figure out. They're trying to model that and understand how vehicles adapt. There's a couple details there. Heat pumps. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, what that is, but it's a more efficient mechanism for heating and cooling a space like the cabin of a car. The vehicles that have heat pumps generally are more efficient at those temperatures, so that can increase range if you have a vehicle that has a heat pump. And actually something interesting that I found out recently is that Tesla, both Model 3 and Model Y, starting in, I want to say late 2019, all have heat pumps because they found it was just so much more efficient for most temperatures. Once you get down to really truly cold temperatures, then you kind of need to bring some of that resistant heat back, just running electricity through wires to heat them up. But in general, weather does have a pretty big impact. And that's really important to recognize, because if you're going to lose 50% of your range when it's zero out, one, you need to factor that in. Two, that kind of needs to be a factor for when you purchase the vehicle. Or say, in the wintertime, we don't use this car because, it's a 2017 Leaf. It starts with 80 miles of range. And in the winter, we're going to get about 30, maybe 40 miles. So it's important for you to factor that in to the mental math that you're doing when you're thinking about driving an electric vehicle. Does that fully answer your question? Hunter.
Can you talk about how, or what you've seen with the commercial fleet, trends you're seeing there? I know I've heard some big companies, like I've seen Amazon, I've seen some of the electric vans. I know the Postal Service was talking about going electric. Is that really a trend you see continuing? Is it growing?
I think there's in some cases where the fleet routes are very long, they're going to have a harder time. Or if there's just a few vehicles where they can't necessarily justify a depot upgrade. But in general, fleets are going to electrify very fast. It's going to happen probably in the next decade, maybe a little bit longer than that for some of the niche cases, the edge cases. But it's the return on investment. The fleet operators, the fleet owners are going to do the math, and for the most part, they're going to transition as quickly as they can, especially the major fleets. The smaller fleets is going to be harder because obviously the smaller the fleet, generally the less specific money to upgrade a lot amount of time, and that also goes to upgrading the depot, which potentially costs quite a lot of money, depending on the size, depending on the vehicles, depending on the charging needs. Additionally, sometimes that can require battery, maybe not require battery storage, but an optimized situation includes battery storage so that you're optimizing your costs, for lack of a better way of saying it. There's a lot of nuance in utility rate structures that can at some point make the decision to add battery storage to a depot site very easy. When you're talking about thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars. All right, I believe there's a question with that gentleman right there.
Yeah, with plug-in vehicles, are any of them more advanced design than just ICE, with the engine in the front and the battery up top? Are there some plug-in vehicles that also have some of the advantage of full EV?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it, the EREV, the extended range electric vehicles, sometimes known as strong plug-in hybrids. But in general, it depends. Depends on your use case, most importantly. I think there's a lot of plug-in hybrids that have somewhere between 30 and 50 miles of range. And generally that's a sweet spot for a lot of people where they can charge at home. That's going to recharge their battery completely. And then when they need to take it out on longer trips, you have your gas tank. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question.
Yeah,
but-
well, I didn't mention hybrid, which is really what I meant.
Okay. I would say, I think of hybrids as efficient gas vehicles. That is basically what they are. You cannot run them on just battery alone for longer than very much time. And usually they also cap out at a certain speed or a certain amount of acceleration that you're asking for. So when you put your foot down, if you just push it down a little bit for a regular hybrid, you might get all electric. But if you push it down a little bit more, engine's going to turn on, you're going to get more of that power from the engine. And so hybrids are a good stepping stone, in my opinion, to plug-in hybrids, but we're past that point right now at this point for the most part, except for where the charging infrastructure is not there yet. So I don't want to diss on hybrids, but we've had about 2 full decades, 1.5 full decades with hybrids. You can argue both ways on that, but they are they're efficient cars, gas cars. Sorry, if people really like their hybrids. I've driven some hybrids myself. They're great. I appreciate them.
So it's talking about the Prius.
So one clarification.
Yeah.
So if I called it a plug-in hybrid, are there
Yes.
any of them with a large enough battery that, and lower in the vehicle and fast acceleration that you get with a pure BEV? Or are they just
There are some vehicles. There are some vehicles where you do have that. And the problem is an electric motor is both very efficient and very fast. It takes almost no time at all for that motor to really kick in and send you going. Whereas internal combustion engine requires a lot of fine tuning to really get it to the point where you push your foot down and you immediately go. Usually there's a little bit of lag. There are some vehicles that kind of balance that. They're usually high-end plug-in hybrids, like the BMW i8 is an example, which I've heard there's a lot of issues with that vehicle specifically, as well as, it's a high-end luxury BMW, so repairing it, maintaining it is also pretty expensive. And its actual electric range is not great. There's also some other vehicles that kind of have that fine line, but again, we're mostly talking about like luxury or even super hypercars that are just like outrageous. Like no one needs that car. It's status. Like Ferrari LaFerrari. Yeah, I didn't think we were gonna go there, but there are a lot of other vehicles that do balance that. And I think the Chevy Volt does a good job of that as well. It's primarily running off of its batteries. It has a larger electric motor, but it also has a large tank that is fueling or replenishing the battery.
What large tank? What are you?
It's got a gas tank. It's, I think,
Oh, you're talking about.
The Volt.
the Chevy Volt.
Okay.
With a V.
So that-
Yeah.
Volt.
Was there a question back there?
I just wanted, if you could speak to maybe the trends on battery disposal and recycling, particularly in light of the millions of cars in the next 5 years that are going to see the end of their life cycle.
Yeah.
of batteries.
So I like to start with, oh God, there's a good slide further on, you'll see it, and you'll be like, no, it's not covered. That slide does not fully cover it. First thing I would say is most batteries that are going to come out of electric vehicles, that is not their end. They're not ready for recycling yet. They have too much energy capacity, have too much power capacity. Each vehicle generally right now is built, each battery is built up of many different cells, usually thousands of cells, and each one of those cells can sell for like anywhere between $1 and like $5. That's like, so even at the end of a EV's battery life, you still could have, at the low end, like a $5,000 asset that either the recycler or somebody is going to want to sell. And there's going to be a lot of organizations that are going to be built up around taking those used cells and selling them to energy storage primarily, I think is going to be a major area. Low-speed vehicles, neighborhood vehicles, golf carts, many other different use cases. And especially at energy storage where you don't need the high capacity, the high power capacity that the EV cells right now have. When they get degraded, you either degrade their total energy capacity, their ability to send out energy for a long time, and you can degrade their power capacity, which is their ability to shoot out energy really fast. And so all of these kind of go into what's the value of that tiny individual cell that comes out of this larger battery pack. And there's companies that basically have already shown that even after you go through all the lives of an individual cell, you can still recycle all of that. Redwood Energy Materials recently came out with a report that said they, at scale, got 95% of the material, the critical mineral materials, from the batteries that they recycled over the last year or so. So this is we're pretty far along, and I've heard of even higher than 95% yield on recycled materials. So the supply chain is really going to fuel that recycled materials in a big way because the value is there. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Go on with your question. Nissan apologized to Recycling World in January. Their batteries are lasting much longer than they anticipated. 10-year-old batteries, the ones that were sold at the 75-mile range, are still 90% functional. So it's, at this point, we aren't getting a huge amount of recycling for those batteries.
I'm not sure if there's really much for me to say there, but other countries are kind of ahead of us in a lot of different ways in the battery supply chain, in the adoption of EVs. And so we actually can learn quite a lot from these organizations. A lot of them actually are international companies, so we're going to see some of those companies hopping over here if they're not already, as well as domestic battery recyclers and domestic battery producers, energy storage facilities, companies. So a lot of good stuff to happen in that arena. All right, any more questions? I want to check on time. All right, we're going to move on to the next section.
Do we have time for another one? Or
let's keep it for the end. All right, who has used an EV charger? All right, who has used an EV charger at home? Who has used an EV charger not at home? That's a question.
Yeah.
Right. Wow, almost looks like there's more people that have used chargers away from home than at home. Which is interesting. How many of you have used a DC fast charger? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Maybe 6. All right. And how many of you, the best question, have used a DC fast charger on a long distance trip? All right, 1, 2, 3. All right. So
Can you tell us what a DC charger is?
we'll get there. We'll get there. That's in 3 slides, I think. 4 slides. I'm so sorry. So level 1 is plugging into a wall outlet. I'm pretty sure there's a couple around here at that power level. However, generally you need a dedicated circuit for EV charging, or at least that's what the code asks for. So pretty simple, I think. Goes without saying it's a low power level. You're not going to get a lot of juice, and it's going to depend on how efficient your vehicle is. For how much juice, as you're going to say, 2 to 5 miles. And that's really going to be determined by what vehicle you're driving, what efficiency it has. The more efficient the vehicle, generally the more aerodynamic, smaller, less weight, more miles you're going to get per hour of charge. That goes for every charging level.
We've got a Chevy Bolt, and we have been recently charging it on 110, and we do a lot better than 2 to 5 per hour.
Yeah, because it's a more efficient vehicle. And also, it's important to recognize, even at the level 1 stage, and there's a slide that shows more of this, not all level 1s are the same. You might get less or more power from a circuit, depending on what its power rating is, depending on when it was built, whether it's a dedicated circuit. Anyway, talk about this for hours, I'm so sorry. Oh, and that last point, people that don't drive every day, I got a colleague that has a 250-mile vehicle, charge on level 1, they don't drive it that much. So, all right, level 2 charging is kind of the thing you're going to see most, because you're going to see it at homes. This is the kind of charging that can charge up just about any vehicle overnight. You're going to get about 12 to 40 plus miles of range. I hate to do this, but on your single family homes, that breaker size is going to generally be between 40 amps and higher. I've seen amp breakers up to 100 amps. It's a very powerful charger. Most vehicles can't even accept that amount of power. And sometimes you'll see it as low as 20 or 25 amps. So that, equivalent to a dryer at the 40 amp breaker size. Apologies if I'm getting into nasty stuff like amps and breakers, but honestly, you hear it now, you're like, what is this? This is weird. I don't like it. But in 5 years from now, when you might have an electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid, you're like, okay, I get it now. It's easy. So you're going to see these chargers all over the place. These chargers are great for long dwell times, workplace charging, destinations, at home, multifamily properties, locations where you don't need to recharge in 1 hour. You don't need to charge in less than 1 hour. You can charge for a long period of time. However, they are considerably faster than level 1 chargers, as the miles gained per hour indicates. Oh, and there's some nuance here. Your home chargers, while pumping up that same amount of energy potentially as a charger out in the public, may not have the same features as those chargers out in the public. Like the ability to communicate with phone apps, or tell those phone apps, hey, I'm in use, stuff like that. So there's a lot of smart features out in public chargers that you're not going to get at home. And some home chargers you will actually have like a phone app, but it's not communicating with the internet, like the cloud, the internet. It might be communicating with the internet to tell you how much you're charging, what the state of charge is on your vehicle. All right, DC fast charging level 3, so getting to your question. What is DC fast charging? It is faster charging, and considerably faster charging. Specifically, these are nasty numbers, don't worry about the kilowatt thing. Small number to larger number. About the same number at the bottom to way larger number. That is really talking about how fast your car is going to charge, how much energy the charger is going to give to your car in a short amount of time. So right now, it's pretty convoluted. You've got three plug types. This one, unless you've got a leaf, you're not worrying about this. For your Tesla, this is the one, generally. You can buy an adapter as a Tesla. to use this, or to use this one. And this plug type, CCS, Combined Charging Standard, don't worry about it, is the one that most vehicles are now being made with, including Nissans, the new Nissans. So all vehicles except for Tesla are making their plug types like this, with one exception. Sorry.
Any discussion to standardize that at all?
Yes, lots of discussion. It's basically coming down to this one. Because Tesla installs their own charging stations, they're not really looking for federal money yet. They're just installing their chargers based on the money that they have. And they're not worrying about making a national standard. Whereas this standard is being developed jointly by many different stakeholders.
Will this be the national standard eventually, do you think?
I don't know. I don't know. I expect it, but as a sort of analogy, the European Union basically said you have to go with CCS back in 2019, I believe, or 2020. And the U.S. was like,
So they don't sell Teslas in Europe?
they do.
So Tesla does their own stations?
Tesla changed their plug type to
Oh.
match,
Oh.
and then upgraded all of their chargers to match up with this one.
So I've owned a Tesla since 2018. I've driven it all over the US and all over Idaho. And it does have a CHAdeMO CCS adapter, which I've used up at the Lewiston, there's a gaming place there, I forget. But the older Teslas don't have a CCS adapter yet, but the newer ones do.
And I think that's something you can just buy, but I don't know if
You
all of them
can't
have
get
the
them.
software.
Yeah, you have to have updates to the older Teslas.
So Tesla also has an adapter to use the CCS. And then the newest chargers, the newest Tesla superchargers actually do have a built-in, they call it a magic box, that allows non-Teslas to use those charging stations. That's like a month or two old.
Yeah, and there are also two speeds of Tesla superchargers. There's like the V3, the super fast ones. They're like 15 minutes, 10 to 80.
Leslie, there's now a third or fourth level, so level 4
Oh,
now.
thank you, yeah.
All right. Lots of different factors for how fast you're going to charge on a DC fast charger, or as I like to call it, just a DC charger. And these chargers are primarily for public infrastructure or fleet use. You're basically never going to see these outside of those two use cases, with the perhaps exception of a public charger that is also used for fleet, or a public charger that is potentially also used for tenant access. And occasionally maybe a valet service, but again, these are very niche cases that I've never seen make sense, because the install cost for a DC fast charger is very high, on the magnitude of $50,000 to $100,000, sometimes higher. And that's excluding the hardware, which is also pretty expensive. Some important things to recognize: vehicles have max charging speeds, and chargers have max charging speeds. If your car has a lower max charging speed than the charger, you're not going to be able to charge at that top speed of the charger. I'm convoluted, but I think we all got that? Okay. And then the battery management system, every car has one of these, basically tells the charger how much power it can accept, which is pretty important, if you want your battery to not burst into flames, or maybe not worse, but degrade really fast, which is why at 80%, generally about 80%, some cars, about 70%, you're going to see that power rate really drop, because the battery management system is saying, hey, I can't take that much power, we're going to overheat, I'm not going to have a good time. So that's why it's doing it. Battery management system's trying to look out for you. The temperature of battery does matter, which is for you who have a vehicle that does this. Sometimes vehicles will preheat to basically get to the charging the charger and be able to take that max power capacity, max power level as early as possible. There's some cool YouTube videos that sort of go over what happens when you do charge and your battery is super frigid, and zero for your battery to heat up to the point where it can take a high power capacity. Okay, I've talked a lot, that's what I do. This is nasty, we're gonna come back to it, I think everybody has it in front of them, I'm so sorry. Simply put, most vehicles will tell you how much power you're using, measured in kilowatts. In this case, I am recharging the Volt EUV. It's one of our fourth fleet vehicles. And we're getting about 20 kilowatts because we are at about 80%. So this car really likes to charge slowly during the last 20%. However, if I were driving, it might go up to 100 kilowatts in terms of power. And that will show in like yellow, or different vehicles have different ways of showing it. Some are green, blue, different colors to indicate I'm using power, I'm regenerating power. And generally that will go back and forth. When you take your foot off the accelerator, it's going to be green. You're getting power back. All right, this was the math stuff. I think we frankly covered a lot of this. This is what I was talking about, the battery cells. They look like AA batteries, but they are a lot more energy dense. A lot. Kind of astounding. And just by themselves like this, that's actually pretty dangerous. Like, just the cell by itself, all you need to do is connect the two ends, and that's a lot of power that's going to flow through it. You need that battery management system to control the power. So miles per gallon, everybody knows that. Miles per kilowatt hour, not everybody knows that. That's an important metric for how efficient your vehicle is. Simply put. And just like some vehicles will tell you what sort of miles per gallon you're getting at that moment, a lot of them really do that. Many cars will tell you how efficient your vehicle is right now. Going uphill, you might be getting really bad efficiency. And going down, it might say, a weird number like 99.99 or 99.99, a lot, because it's sending power back into the battery and it thinks it can do that forever. There's some trucks and SUVs getting about 2 miles per kilowatt hour. Still note, this is still way more efficient on an energy basis than gasoline, because electric motors are far more efficient. However, you can't haul around as much energy in total. Getting into the nasty part, a gallon of gas has about 33, 32 kilowatt hours of energy in it. Gas tanks are only 10 to 20 gallons, right? So most of these trucks, 100, 120 kilowatt hour battery packs. A gas vehicle is carrying around 3 to 6 times as much energy. And that's the reason why you can drive longer. It's pretty straightforward. Sorry, there's a lot on here. I like introducing people to this so that they feel comfortable with it down the road, but I understand this is not kind and friendly. Also, who thought they were coming to a presentation and they were going to have to deal with math? I don't think anybody thought that. This is sort of a catch-all slide for what's my situation, what's the technology, what's the charging speed that I'm going to be looking for. One caveat here is for workplaces, you're generally not going to see that level 1. It's very rare. But this is a useful slide if you've got, like, if you're a business owner or say, fleet situations. I kind of left it open on fleet because it really does depend on the vehicle. Medium and heavy duty, you're likely going to want DC fast charging. Potentially fast level 2. But on light duty fleet vehicles, just any day vehicles, including trucks, SUVs, just you're really probably going to want level 2 charging. That also assumes that the vehicle is parked at the depot overnight or something like that. So depends, but also this is kind of cheat sheet, which is kind of all right, last few slides for charging. How do I find charging? There's a lot of apps. There's also a lot of websites. Here are 3. ChargeWay, which does a good job of only showing you chargers that you can use. PlugShare, which has a website and an app, that one's been around for a very long time. Will actually also show you outlets that you could plug into, like RV parks. Saved a friend of mine. And basically, all of these apps are going to have phone apps. So if you're looking for something, you're looking for a charger, or you're thinking about an EV, check out some of these websites, some of these apps, and think, okay, these are some of the trips that I like to take. This is a trip that I'd love to take, cross country. Where am I going to charge? And start looking at places around. There's a lot of chargers in places you wouldn't expect. Basically every single EV charging company that has a public charger is going to have a phone app. And so you can start the charge through those phone apps. I personally wouldn't recommend having as many apps as I do, but you can download many different apps and set up accounts on all of them. Again, I would not recommend that. Question?
One thing I've discovered driving around the US is that a lot of RV parks allow or places to charge up. Like one time I was trying to go from Lewiston to Montana at 120 degrees uphill, and I stopped at a park in Kamei and was able to use the RV chargers.
That's good. A friend of mine did a Yellowstone loop and charged at both chargers and an RV park around there. Longer travels, I think I already mentioned this, but specifically ChargeWay and a better route planner. PlugShare also has a feature like this. It's basically a trip planning feature. And you plug in your destinations, it will show you the optimized route. Sometimes it doesn't factor in, like, hey, I want to, stop at this place and get a delicious lunch. Like, hey, you're going to Billings, Montana to visit my relatives. I'm definitely stopping in Three Forks for Wheat, Montana, just straight up. Delicious. So it'll also tell you like how long you need to charge. One cool thing about ChargeWay is they'll show you where the chargers are. They'll show you how long it's going to take at a charger. You can customize that and go into advanced features. Your car, it'll kind of set it up for your car specifically, so you'll have to pick what vehicle you're working with ahead of time. So it'll only show you chargers that can work for your vehicle, which is really nice for the DC fast charging stuff. Remember those 3 ports. And then you can use the trip planner. And then there's that function right here, all stations. You just push that, it'll take 10 seconds and tell you all the charging stations along that route. They're trying to improve that feature, and I think they may have already come out with an update soon. But they use a slightly different method. Green for CCS, red for Tesla, and then blue for the Nissans. Nissan Leafs, sorry. And then the higher the number, the faster the charge. Pretty straightforward. With 1 being level 1 and 2 being level 2. All right, how to use a charger. Sometimes you don't think it should be this difficult. And I personally don't think it should be this difficult, which is why the future's going to look better. And for Teslas, it already is. But read the instructions at the site. If you already have the phone app that works for that charger, probably you'll want an account ahead of time. And to add a payment mechanism and sort of understand what that app's setup is. Not all these apps are, frankly, streamlined for user experience. As an industry, I'm going to say, sorry, we're working on it. When in doubt, plug in the charger and start the charge through the phone app. That's generally my rule of thumb. If that doesn't work, you're probably going to need to either look at a different charger at that same location, or to call in to reboot the charger. So, yeah. Okay, we can go over more questions later. As I said, the future is going to be better. Plug-in charge protocol is coming to a lot of these DC fast chargers and even many of the level 2 chargers in the coming years, which simply is like a Tesla. You plug in, it's going to authenticate through your vehicle's account, which you have to have set up ahead of time. But it's seamless, or pretty much seamless. older chargers are likely gonna have a harder time. So the newer the charger, likely, the faster that process will happen.
What is a typical bill for a charge?
It depends on the charger, but yeah, it really depends on the charger. I've seen prices per kilowatt hour or prices per minute. I've seen anywhere from like $8 or $9 all the way up to 25. So it really depends on the specific location.
I'm sorry, I feel silly for even asking this question, because we charge solely at home, so we don't go out driving and using these. I just assumed that they were like a gas station where you just use a credit card and you pay for it that way.
You can.
So you have to have an app?
You do not have to.
Yeah, you do.
So you use an app and you
You
put
don't
your credit card information on that and pay through the app?
So it depends on the level 2 chargers. Most level 2 public chargers do not have the ability to take a credit card. Some of them do have the tap to pay ability, but those are just a few of them. The DC fast chargers generally do have a swiper and a credit card tap to pay, and even a phone like digital card that you could use as well. However, those tend to be one of the most common parts for problems. So just a heads up on that. So it's generally good to have the app when you're using that station and not trust the credit card reader. That said, I have started a charge like that before on just the tap to pay credit card. This way.
I tried that, and it, like you said, it just didn't function.
Yeah.
So you go to, actually, the other one was a public charger, it didn't cost me anything, so I was happy the first one did work. But
so there is a tax credit for EV chargers as well. IRS Form 8911. It is both applicable to individuals installing chargers at their homes. That caps at about $1,000. It's 30% or $1,000. Non-refundable. That goes without saying. And then there's also a business tax credit as well. So for the businesses, it's quite a different story. And it's probably something, if you are planning on installing chargers and owning them, you're going to want to incorporate some of this. For the 30% or up to $100,000 per port, you have to qualify quite a few different details. But otherwise, it's 6% or up to $100,000. And this also is applicable to other charging or other refueling mechanisms other than electric vehicles. So that's the reason why I think the 100,000 really more applies to some of those other technologies, because 30% of even a really expensive DC fast charger is probably not going to run you $100,000 per port, with a few exceptions, where you do not have power and you need to run in a lot of power. Okay. Any questions on this quickly?
Are those conditions and or under location specific? Is that all of the below or one of the below? So in other words, not an urban area poverty rate, is it?
I would need to do some more.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. At one point I knew, and those are details. Those are tiny details that slip my grasp. The prevailing wages and percent of work done by apprentices go hand in hand. So those are pretty significant as well, because most businesses do not have that written into their RFP process, or their contracts with electricians don't include that.
So if you put in a station at your business and it cost you $100,000, you could get up to 30% off if you pay prevailing wages and have some work done by apprentices? So you'd maybe pay only $70,000?
So it's again, it's a tax credit.
Right,
So
the credit would be.
it's 30% up to $100,000. So actually, it'd be 30% of that total cost.
Right, but let's say if it's $100,000, then you get hopefully $30,000 back as a tax credit. Okay.
You also have to meet the location.
What's that?
You also have to meet the location
Right.
requirements. So either, from what I understand, certain census tracts in urban areas, if they are they have a poverty rate, they meet the poverty rate or the median income, and then rural areas also have to meet this. So I think there's,
So it's an
by
or,
census tract.
so it's an or of those, right?
I
Either,
think there are some urban areas that qualify, but they have to be, I mean, it's census tract by census tract, and so you have to go and figure out if you're in one of the census tracts that meets the location requirements.
right, but I'm just saying, it's an or, any one, if you meet any one of those,
No, I think you have to
you
meet
meet
All of them?
all of them.
Okay.
Or
Probably.
two, I think it's, I
Okay.
wanna say it's two or three.
There's some good resources online.
Okay, sorry, I don't wanna get too much
No,
in the
no.
weeds.
They haven't put a lot of details out on this one yet, so I think a lot of us in the industry are going,
Yeah. Well, and there's an important piece
Course.
here that I don't have written that I really should have. This also applies to entities that are non-taxable. Non-taxable. So
Like churches?
they have not detailed the mechanism for how they're going to distribute that money, at least from what I have seen, and I have dug deeper than I think everybody else at my organization. One day I'm going to find this, but Fourth is a nonprofit, so we would fall under that category and potentially could change some things. So yeah.
What is the cost of a level 2 charger?
At a single-family home or a public location? Single-family home? It depends dramatically on how close you are to your panel, your electrical panel, and whether your electrical panel has capacity.
Chevy will put it in free.
They will.
Ours.
Do they include panel upgrades as well?
They did not have to do it at ours, but they put in a new breaker and then gave us a plug-in cord for no cost.
I paid $350 for mine, but I didn't have to do a panel upgrade.
One thing to note is you can also install an outlet. You don't need to hardwire it, which directly connected to the circuit. But yeah, that generally can be cheaper. However, you need that outlet right next to your car, or close enough.
Close enough.
Yeah.
The wire distance, or the cord distances for most level 2s and level 1s is up to 25 feet.
Right.
And usually it's 18 feet or 12 feet, depending on where you get the charger. Question?
Just to follow her though, is there a range? You said it depends, but are they like 100 to 300? Are they like 5,000?
For a single family home, I would say base level, you're probably talking a couple $100 because electricians are expensive. Actually, no, in some cases it's zero because you somehow magically have an outlet right next to your car and you get a level 2 charger with the vehicle.
Like a dryer voltage.
That is,
Yeah.
Dryer.
there's also, if you have a dryer nearby where you're gonna charge your car, you can buy a smart splitter basically that doesn't allow you to charge your vehicle at the same time as running your dryer, but will allow you to simultaneously plug in those two vehicles at the same time, and that's all certified as that is a good way of doing it. I highly recommend that route. You can save a lot of money.
Thank you.
However, you can actually get pretty expensive, even at a single-family home level. If your electrical panel is not very close to where you park your car, and you have to run through a bunch of walls, you have to run around the house, that can cost a lot of money. So I would say rarely you're going to go above like $3,000 or $4,000, but that's also pretty significant. So factoring that in and understanding where your panel is, where you're going to run electricity, electrical wiring, that's really important for factoring in how much it's going to cost.
Yeah.
And you can generally get quotes. There's a company called Q-Merit, and I believe actually Q-Merit's the one that works with Chevy and a couple other organizations, other manufacturers, to make that process really streamlined if you want to get multiple bids from different electricians to install a level 2 charger.
Yeah, these are level 2, but I mean, if you have a house, you can just plug it into a 110 and get X amount of charge every night.
And sometimes that, often that will work for people that don't drive much more than 40, 50 miles in a day. Obviously with a truck that changes a little bit more because you need more energy to go the same distance. Yeah. Okay. We're about to go on break and then we're going to do more questions.
Oh, all right.
So, one last question? One last question.
Well, it's probably a long question, but I think for me, the thing that I'm mostly concerned about is the infrastructure. So when someone purchases the charging station, let's say they get the charging podiums, they install them. Who's responsible for maintaining them if they break? A business owner puts them in, but now the business owner is responsible for understanding how they work, understanding for all the parts, the pieces, if they break, if they get vandalized. I've seen a couple of programs where people have gone, they look to see that there's a station, they go there, it's missing parts and pieces.
Yeah.
There's a business next door, they say, hey, it's broken, and the guy says, not my job to maintain this. I didn't put it in. So, you know, I can see where you're going to places like a Walmart, for example, big shopping areas or something like that. Do the Walmart employees take responsibility for them? Do they have people hired to
So-
take care of them? You know, this is the kind of
Yeah.
support system that I think I would like to see in place before I just start going somewhere else. The station is there, but is it a working station?
So for the sake of time, I'm gonna say it depends, and generally, it's gonna be either the charging owner, actually, it's almost always the charging owner, and the charging owner may actually be the charging service provider, which is just like one of the companies that you might download their app, like Electrify America, Tesla,
ChargePoint.
actually, surprisingly, not ChargePoint, almost always. ChargePoint rarely owns their chargers.
How,
Yeah, which is really important when you factor in, why is that ChargePoint charger down? It's probably not ChargePoint. It's probably the station owner.
We went to Whole Foods one time and 3 of the 4 chargers were kaput, and nobody knew anything about anything.
in the building?
So
Okay.
yeah.
We need to take a little break. It's a lot of time. We'll go over a few more items, but it's primarily Q&A after this. Cute little puppy. To kind of keep people engaged. Long presentations, me talking a lot. Sort of the first question, but we're going to come back to it in a little bit. Charging use cases, we kind of went over some of this already. Level 1, level 2, single family homes. Something that's important about when you buy a charger for yourself, for my sake, and for your sake, and for people that live around you, please buy a UL listed or
Yes.
a nationally recognized testing laboratory certified charger. That means they have actually tested the components that are being used in that charger to make sure they're up to snuff, up to code. That's the word. Codes. So please do that. Most of the fires happen because people aren't listening to the codes. We gotta move quickly. Multifamily charging has a lot of barriers. I'd love to talk more about them, but I actually could do probably a 2-hour presentation just on multifamily charging. That would be brutal.
Oh, yeah. Do it.
People want to charge where they park. That's kind of important. That said, if you can't give them that, having a charger at their same apartment complex or condominium complex is pretty darn good. Making that affordable is actually somewhat difficult. There's mechanisms for getting around that, but they are few and far between, often requiring subsidization. Hold off on the questions, we're gonna have a good time in just a second. Workplace charging, excellent employee amenity, sometimes can also be a amenity that actually, or an asset that brings in revenue. There's a bunch of different business models for chargers, public chargers, or even private chargers for workplaces, multifamily homes as well. But in general, workplace charging has been shown to dramatically increase the chance of people buying EVs. I think the study said about 6 times. And that's because when people know that they have charging at one of their 2 most common places where they drive to, you have much greater range security, which is balancing out the common phrase of things I So this is just in general a good thing to have at a workplace. there's some nuances here. Sometimes the workplace doesn't own their parking, so you need to have some sort of, you have to go through the parking lot owner, which might be a property management company, or it might be a parking lot company. So it's important to recognize which stakeholder actually has that veto, and who is going to need the alignment and the return on investment. Who needs to see those numbers in order to make that happen. There's a lot of resources out there, and even more, Fourth has a program launching in October. We're working with a lot of national stakeholders and national nonprofits to really outreach and engage with a lot of employers. So potentially you might hear from Fourth again on that kind of note. Public charging overview. Public charging encompasses a lot of different aspects of charging. Every charger that you could just drive up to is a public charger. Sometimes public chargers are not always available, but generally when you're talking about public charging, it is going to be available 24/7. Hopefully it'll have amenities nearby. Again, that changes when businesses close and other aspects. But public charging also incorporates corridor charging, incorporates destination charging in a lot of cases, and includes curbside or right-of-way charging. So that's sort of a subset of public charging where just along the street, you might park, there might be a charger there someday. And there's a lot of different municipalities that are testing out this. What's funny is actually the smaller the government entity and the less stakeholders involved with roads, the easier it is to make happen, which kind of makes sense when you factor in the number of stakeholders involved in a project generally increases the amount of time and cost. So in a small, tiny town that doesn't have a major highway or a minor highway going through it, that actually can be some of the easiest locations to install right-of-way charging. That said, if there's a parking lot nearby, it's probably cheaper there too. So costs and pros and cons. Corridor charging is a subset of public charging, vital for getting anywhere long distances. Also can be a great backup for folks that don't have access to affordable charging at home. So, kind of moving on to more of the, let's throw a bunch of slides in here and see what sticks. Light duty versus heavy duty charging, there's a significant difference, both in scale, amount of size, land that you need. There's a big difference between a gas station in an urban area and a gas station at a truck stop. We've all seen that. We've all been there. Same thing for charging with heavy duty, medium duty trucks. You need faster chargers generally. You need more space. You need more space for them to turn. Simple stuff like that. And you also need utility infrastructure. And likely you need to be talking to for a truck stop, you need to be talking to the utility way in advance, like 5 years, maybe longer, because some of those components are extremely expensive to procure. And then actually, there is this megawatt charging standard. I didn't even throw the port on here because this is like years in the future, but that's a whole nother magnitude level of power up above. Like 4.5 megawatts is enough to power like a block in like a dense urban area. That's a huge amount of power, just disgusting amounts of power, like thousands of homes. Disgusting. Ships, airplanes, semi-trucks, construction, mining, and more. Question?
So I've seen a lot of hydrogen along the hydrogen hubs, in the maritime industries. Like at what point do you stop trying to do it electric, create an electric vehicle and go into hydrogen?
It depends. And we're gonna go back to, we're gonna skip that, sorry. It depends.
Okay.
And that is a different presentation, hopefully presented by a different person. I know enough to be dangerous, not enough to be useful. There's One of my favorite things I learned back in like 2019 is there was a mining company in Europe that had like just an absolutely massive mining hauler, a truck. And it would start at the bottom of the hill, drive up, load up with, I want to say something in the range of 100,000 pounds of rock, and then go down the hill. And while it's going down the hill, it's just recharging its battery. They had to charge that truck like once every few weeks.
Wow.
There are already plans for airplanes, although recently over in Moses Lake, Washington, they did a hydrogen plane test, and that was at least a few hundred miles, if I remember correctly. It's a very small plane, I want to say like a 6-passenger. But you're going to start seeing stuff like that for really small niche cases, and a lot of the big airlines are working on that because they know, specifically actually CARB down in California is working on incorporating jet fuel into their clean fuels, their low carbon fuel standard. Don't worry about that. It's an incentive program that basically requires fuel importers to pay money to alternative fuel, lower carbon fuels, and jet fuel is eventually going to be on that list. Right now it's exempt, but that's going to cause a lot of stir and provide a lot of money for low carbon fuels in the future, including hydrogen, probably electricity. Okay, we're pretty much at the end of the slides. Let's go back to, actually, I'm going to leave you with that at the end. What are some more topics you'd like to hear from, hear about? Any questions?
Can you talk a little bit about the workforce necessary to support this whole industry?
Yeah.
What are the trends there?
Okay. So there's different flows. Obviously, you have your electricians for actually installing infrastructure. You have your manufacturers for charging equipment. You have your manufacturers for vehicles. You have your supply chains for all of those components for those vehicles and for those chargers. You have your educational facilities and schools that help train electricians. And then I feel like I'm missing at least a few other folks. Yeah, your construction firms that specialize in electrical equipment. There's already quite a few. Burns McDonnell, it'll come to me. I'll say some more of them. Engineering, procurement, construction firms.
Do you see that being a bottleneck in adoption? Is it something to be concerned about, or is there other things?
I think there's already bottleneck in the electricians chain, educational chain, and you see that in the really high rates that electricians charge. In some areas, you see it in the fact that you just can't get an electrician to come out to your single-family home and install a charger, or the quote is really high, or it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get a quote, and it's because their time is valuable and they're working on other projects. So I think that's one bottleneck. Another bottleneck is retooling facilities, production facilities for vehicles. The chargers, there's a lot of bottlenecks. Sorry, simple answer, there's a lot of bottlenecks. There's a lot of different bottlenecks in a lot of different places. So parts for hardware is a big constraint. You're seeing a lot of broken chargers that just, the lead time of getting parts takes a while. Having an electrician that's trained on those chargers, getting those parts, when they can come out, it might be weeks or even months. That's the reason why, one of the reasons why you're seeing such delays in actually fixing chargers, along with the stakeholder mismanagement, or maybe even the stakeholder not knowing they're in charge of their chargers. So all of that factors in. But I think the major bottleneck is vehicle production, because as more vehicles come out, the utilization of chargers goes up, which incentivizes charging service providers to do a better job of providing their service, maintaining their chargers better, and providing parts for when they break. Right now, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of really, like, there's not a lot of politicians basically saying, we are going to make legislation to punish companies that don't have their chargers up. And actually recently, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure part of the, what is it? It was a big legislation a couple of years ago that has rules and regulations around uptime for chargers. It's 97% uptime, and if you do the math, it's, you know, really great. But if all of that downtime happens to be the coldest week, and you're trying to get somewhere in that coldest week, you might have a problem, because cold weather can kill people. So that's something that I, you know, it's always in the back of my mind. What's going to happen when, you know, you have a cold snap, -20, and you need to get hundreds, if not, you know, 1,000 miles or more, and the chargers are down, and there's not shelter. There's not a, you know, heated place for you to go. That becomes a very, you know, hard conversation, especially in some of these really rural areas, which Idaho has quite a few. So that's something that I have to keep in the back of my mind. And hopefully, you know, when charging stations are added along major routes and even minor routes, they factor that in, because you can't just have you know, programs built around California, or frankly anywhere that's just, you know, happy and sunny a lot of the time. It doesn't work. I don't think that answered all of your question, but yeah. Any questions? Any other questions? We got about 20 more minutes. Oh, we got 7 more minutes. That's
So multifamily EV charging, I'd like to talk about the obstacles to those. I mean, I know some of the higher end places in town have got a few, but, you know, are there any advantages in the recent bills passed to help with, you know, the lower end multifamily units to provide EV charging?
simply put, no.
Okay.
Yeah. Simply put, no. And that's also a pretty significant equity issue, because people that don't have a lot of money generally rent, and they're not renting the super luxury locations. So this is something I worked on a lot last year, project that worked on a lot, and starting from the barriers, you've got a lot of barriers. Older buildings don't generally have the electrical capacity necessary to add EV chargers. Their parking might be full because everyone's driving, because you're far away from your job, potentially. And so not only would it cost a lot to upgrade the building, potentially you even need to upgrade the panel, theoretically even service to the building, which could add a long time delay to both, you know, make that happen from the utility side and to get the transformers necessary to upgrade that site's electrical capacity. Generally, it's not the case, but you know, just adding a panel can be very expensive, and then running power from that panel to individual parking spots, potentially hundreds of feet away, the costs really skyrocket. That's also to say nothing about internet connection down in garages. Often that is spotty. So having solutions that don't require internet access are critical. I know of a couple companies that enable that. I would not say they're cheap. So again, unfortunately, it comes back to cost, which should surprise absolutely nobody. So it's a cost thing, and it's also a priorities thing. You know, who has the money? You know, at the county, state, city level, utility level, and or even regulator level, and what are they prioritizing to get funding? And in multifamily case, you almost always need subsidization in order for the property managers to approve or even see a positive return on investment long term. I was recently talking to a multifamily property management firm, and you know, the question was, what's the ROI? And I said, what's your time frame? And that's, you know, an important thing. Additionally, there's a lot of different ways of having an ROI. It might be rent increases, which, you know, can displace people from where they're living. So if you throw a bunch of chargers in a low-end multifamily location, you're probably going to see people with EVs come, or people buy EVs because they have the money. What you're also going to see is likely some people being priced out, which can be natural in a market that has, you know, adequate housing supply. But as I've heard, Boise doesn't exactly have the best housing supply right now.
Yeah.
So, and that's, you know, Boise is not alone in that. Most cities, small and big, have that same kind of problem, where the housing supply is just woefully not enough.
So asking about topics.
Yeah, topics.
So what would be interesting to me as an EV owner would be strategies on how to travel distances in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And also experiences that people have had who own EVs. This is on the consumer level, just the basic, you know, mom and pop driving around town. What those experiences are, you know, the cost, benefits, that sort of thing. So more of a primer for people either thinking about getting into EVs or people who are already in EVs to share information.
Check out those apps. Plug Share Special.
Oh, I have probably 5 apps on my phone right now.
Yeah.
But, you know, we basically charge at home. I use charge stations when I'm forced to, and when you travel pretty much anywhere in Idaho, you're forced to use charge stations. Some of the stuff you covered about, oh, well, they can help you route, I didn't know about that, so that was very nice.
That's pretty important. Unfortunately, we're not, with the exception of a few cars, we're not at the point where you can simply just hop in your car and go anywhere.
No.
And that's really unfortunate. In some cases, I'd say Teslas, you can get away with that, but it's more regional. Like, you're not really going to be able to go anywhere. But, you know.
Well, I just suggested it as the topic for the future.
Yeah, totally.
Not to solve it tonight, but I think people would be interested in that.
Absolutely.
Are there any innovations coming in the future where charging doesn't have to take place at a charge point? Like solar photovoltaics on the car itself, or energy from the wheels on the road, and what's happening in that space?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. Not a lot of time, but you've got R&D on electric roads to charge cars while they're moving. I don't see that panning out very quickly or for very long. Wireless charging is a thing, and actually it's very efficient, which most people don't know. It is already in use on a couple of transit locations in Washington, I want to say, and in other states as well. In fact, there's a taxi airport, I think Oslo Airport, in Europe, in Europe, that has like a row of wireless charging, and taxis line up and they just charge while they're waiting. Additionally, solar, yes, very much so. However, rarely directly connected to the vehicle, because then you're only getting power when the sun is shining. Often you're going to have that paired with battery storage. There's a couple companies that do that. The ones I'm thinking of are Beam, B-E-A-M. They have this thing called the EV Arc, and that integrates solar charging and battery storage, and as well as completely off-grid, movable platform, and flood resistant. So it's interesting case, and you can actually combine them together to power a DC fast charger too. And then solar cars, there's a car called Aptera, A-P-T-E-R-A, which honestly I love it. It's basically a spaceship. They basically said, we're gonna make this thing as efficient as possible. They're getting about 10 miles per kilowatt hour. And you can get about 40 miles of range off their solar rooftop. And theoretically, if you're in the right locations at the right time, you'll never need to charge. That said, they're also the company that is using the Tesla chargers, so you could connect up to a supercharger. They are much slower at charging, but because their batteries are so much smaller, you don't need to charge as fast or for as longer. I think we're about time. Amy's gonna come and me off, but I can talk more later, tomorrow potentially, and you can take my business card and email me questions.
Thank you, Whit, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Amy Leff. I'm the communication coordinator here at Compass, and this is our first in-person education series we've done since January of 2020. So it's wonderful to see so many people back in person and be able to have the great discussion that we have had today. With that, thank you all very much for coming, and thank you again, Whit and Varun.